But my name is Sean Ahern. I'm the Director of Guidance at Boston College High School, and I'm thrilled that you guys are joining us tonight. I know people are incredibly busy at this time of year, so I really appreciate that you are going to spend about an hour and a half with us this evening. Normally, pre-pandemic, we would have done this program in person. And one of the things I loved about the in-person presentation is we would have divided all the junior parents into groups and had them meet with their son's own counselor. And we loved getting to see and meet some of our juniors' parents. So we unfortunately don't get that opportunity now during a pandemic, but one of the pluses is that allows you to have this presentation from your home. You can watch it in your pajamas, and hopefully it will be very relaxing and you don't have to brave the cold or Boston traffic to get to enjoy this presentation. At BC High, we start almost all of our events at BC High with a prayer. So I'd ask that Judy Fargo, one of our counselors, start us off with the prayer that is probably the most famous prayer of St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Judy?
John, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all that I have and call my own. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen.
Thank you, Judy. And every time I hear that that prayer, I love it. And I know a lot of our students are very familiar with that prayer. I love the college process, so I'm so excited to talk about it tonight. I think it's fun. I think it's exciting. I love to see the juniors discover colleges they never heard of and think it's a good match. I love when they start to visit some colleges and get a sense of what they might want to study in college. So I think the process can be very fun and exciting, but I do realize a lot of people feel like this process is anxiety provoking and has a lot of stress. So our goal tonight is to try to lower that anxiety and to make it less stressful. And hopefully, if you can view this as a fun self-discovery process for your son, hopefully it's something that you will enjoy as well as a parent. Tonight, we're going to try to do something a little bit ambitious, which is try to cover all of the main topics in the college search and application process. And I know that we're going to present a lot of information to you, and it may seem a little overwhelming, but here's what to remember. If you forget everything we say tonight, realize your sons are going to get this information over the course of a year in junior and senior group guidance. So your sons will understand what they're supposed to do because they'll have a class every 2 weeks in this topic. The other piece is all of you are welcome to contact your son's guidance counselor, email them, call them, set up a meeting, and we'd be happy to go over any part of the process with you. We do not expect you all to be experts in this. It's complicated and there are a lot of nuances. And as I said, I love this process, and I know that the people on my other members of my department here also love it, would be happy to talk to you about it. So I do want you to know who else will be joining us tonight. We do have a second parent program that is basically going to be virtually identical to this one, and that's taking place on Wednesday, February 2nd at 8:30 in the morning. So if you wanted to attend that, you certainly could attend that as well. We are going to be recording this program. So if you have to leave at some point, this will be recorded and it should be put into as an attachment in the either next week or the week after's Eagle update. So know that tonight, half of our department is presenting. The other half will present basically the exact same program on Wednesday, February 2nd in the morning. So joining us tonight, we have Judy Fargo, who is our veteran in our department, who said the prayer so nicely. So Judy, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I've been at BC High. This is my 20th year. So whenever I say that to the boys, I laugh and I think longer than they've all been alive. So, and I do love working with them on this process and seeing the things that they learn about themselves and about what they are hopeful for their future. And as Sean said, we're happy to talk to any of you if you have questions for us. And I went to Framingham State and Fairfield University and Cambridge College. So that's my background, educational
Great.
background.
Thank you, Judy. And Kyle?
Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Swords. I've been here at BC High. This is my 5th year. I grew up in Connecticut, went to Providence College for my undergrad degree, and then got my master's degree at Boston College. And prior to joining the guidance department at BC High, I worked for about 5 years in the admission office at Bentley University in Waltham. So I've been around the college process for a couple of years now.
Thanks, Kyle. Eddie?
Hey everyone, my name is Eddie Simmons. Like Sean mentioned earlier, I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City and I actually attended an all-boys Catholic Jesuit high school like BC High called Rockhurst High School. And then I came to the Boston area to go to Boston College, went to Cambridge College to get my master's in school counseling. I worked as a school counselor for about 4 years at a public high school. And then this is my 6th year now at Boston College High School.
Thanks, Eddie. Maddie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie Turner. I'm actually originally from the DC area, but I moved to Boston a few years ago for grad school, where I went to BU and got my master's in school counseling. And while undergoing my internship in my grad school program, that's actually when I was first introduced to BC High. I started my internship at BC High, working in the guidance office. And then from there, I was hired to be a full-time counselor. So last year was my first year full-time working in the guidance office. It's been wonderful. And I'm happy to be back this year, my 2nd year. I went to undergrad at Elon University, which is in North Carolina. Great little mid-sized school in the South. So maybe some of your sons will take a look at it if they're hoping for some warmer weather. But yeah, I'm really, really happy that you all are here tonight. We're really excited about this and to jump into the college process.
Thanks so much, Maddie. Both Maddie and Kyle were interns in our office, and we're thrilled that they decided to stay after their internship. As I mentioned, I'm Sean Ahern. I'm the Director of Guidance at BC High, and I'm almost as long as Judy. She's been here a little longer, so I'm 18 years at BC High. And prior to working at BC High, I worked at Fordham Prep, a Jesuit high school in New York, all boys, very similar to BC High, except they root for the Yankees and not the Red Sox. And I worked at Fairfield University in admissions. In fact, I think Judy and I were there at the same time. I did my undergrad there and worked in admissions. I have a master's from Fordham in school counseling and then a master's from Harvard in education. And I love to travel and visit colleges. And any of my friends who go with me anywhere are dragged to visit colleges. So I was just in DC last weekend and dragged my friend to visit Georgetown and George Washington, and it was freezing cold. And my friend was like, "What are you doing?" But I love visiting schools. And even if I've seen them again, it's always fun to see what new buildings and new programs they have. So tonight, just to be able to manage things, we've got a lot that we're going to go over. If you have questions, we would like you to ask the question in the Q&A feature. If the question is pretty easy to be answered, then a number of us during the program who aren't speaking at that moment will try to answer the question. If you have a specific question about your son that's very geared to his academic interests, it may be best to ask your son's counselor. And then at the very beginning here, we are going to use the chat feature for just a second. We will have time at the end of the program to answer questions. So if some of the questions that you ask in the chat, in the Q&A are a little bit more nuanced, we'll probably wait till the end of the program to answer them so that we can give a little bit more of an in-depth answer to your questions.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I just remind parents that all these slides and handouts are in the download section of the Eagle Update. If they didn't notice that, it's on the right-hand side of the Eagle Update.
Awesome, Judy. Yeah, they're right there for in tonight's Eagle Update, so you should see them there. Your sons are in the process of taking their midterms, so I know that that's kind of stressful. So I thought maybe we should start with a pop quiz for you guys, so you can empathize with your sons what it's like to take a quiz. So we have a pop quiz for you, and I would like you all to answer the questions to the quiz in the chat feature. So that's the only time tonight we're going to use the chat is during this pop quiz. So Eddie, roll us with the number one question is, I just have to move my screen a little bit, the number of colleges in the United States. So in the chat feature, please tell me what you think are the number of colleges in the United States. Oh, Valerie, I love that. Valerie Hamlet. Oh, well, Valerie Hamlet. Yep. All right. A lot of people have some answers. So I see 10,000, 6,000, 6,000. So it changes. Every year there's, it seems like a few colleges close and there are a few that open, but basically it's about 4,000 colleges, a little over, about 3,000 are four-year colleges. So we are so lucky in the United States. There's so many colleges. I visited Ireland a number of years ago, and I think in total they have about 9 universities in the entire country. Estonia has 2. I had a student who was looking at Estonian colleges. He has 2, so there are only 2 to choose from. So in the United States, we are so lucky that there are so many schools and there's so many different kinds of schools. And that's why our role, I think, is very helpful to help you all navigate this kind of complex process because there's so many options. All right, next question, Eddie. Number of colleges within the 128 loop in Boston. So who knows? And this definitely has changed. If you're an older son who went through this process, I love Pascal. Pascal had a good answer, 55, 50, 15, 160, 45, 150. And the answer, Eddie, is 45. So I like Pascal because a couple of years ago, it was over 50. So sadly, a number of colleges in the Boston area have closed, such as or merged, like Pine Manor and Mount Ida. But we're still so lucky that in the Boston area, your sons can visit so many colleges so easily. I always point out that in Wyoming, there's 1 college in the entire state, University of Wyoming, or at least 1 4-year school. So, if you live in Wyoming, it's hard to visit colleges, but in the Boston area, there's really no excuse. You can hop on the Red Line and see so many different schools. And that is something we're going to emphasize with your sons, to visit colleges. So we are lucky in the Boston area. All right, next question, Eddie. Average acceptance rate at a 4-year college in the United States. What are some of your thoughts on that? Let's see in the chat feature, who's guessing? 72%, 20%. Let's see who else, 50, 65, 82. Okay, a lot of good guesses. I'm happy to see a lot of you are guessing a little bit on the higher end, and that's correct. The reason we have this question in our pop quiz of 65% is that when you look at the media, if you read the Boston Globe or the Herald or the news, they're usually focusing on those hyper selective schools, whether it be MIT or Harvard or Stanford, that have acceptance rates in the single digits. And yes, there are a few schools like that, but the vast majority of schools in the country have acceptance rates over 50%, which means that the vast majority of colleges in the country want to accept your sons. They're looking for reasons to accept your sons, not deny your sons. So I do know that the hype is these very selective colleges, but most schools are much more generous in their acceptance rates. All right, Eddie, what else? Percentage of Americans 25 and older with a college degree. What do we think about that? What percent of Americans do we think? Let's see, 40%, 40, 25, 35, 75, 65. What's interesting, I think Massachusetts as a state has the highest percent, but actually overall it's pretty low. Eddie, it's 36%, which means if you have a college degree or your son eventually gets a college degree, currently he'll be in a very elite group of about only 36% of the people in the country. And that's not saying that those people went to hyper selective colleges, but any college. So not many people in the United States actually have college degrees. And if we look at the world, percentage of adults in the world with a college degree, anyone want to guess on that? 8, 10, 5, 5, 15, 12. And Eddie, what is it? Is 7? 7. Well, the good news is in the years that we've done this, it has risen from 6%, I think, to 7%. But still, you can see that if your son has a college degree, he will be, in the very elite of the world. So it's one of those things that we try to help your sons understand that no matter which college he goes to, he'll probably get a very good education and will be considered, very, has a very advanced degree compared to most people in the world. So you all did incredibly well on the quiz. So thank you so much. So that was the chat feature. So right now we're going to close the chat feature, and any other questions will direct you to the question and answer feature if you would. All right. So Eddie, next slide, and we'll lead it on to the next person here.
All right, excellent. So we're going to start off with talking a little bit about our junior group guidance curriculum. And so what your sons can expect with the second semester. Once midterms are over, we'll start meeting with your sons every other week in sort of little small classes of all juniors. And basically in those group guidance classes, the junior curriculum, we really start to dive more into the college search process is one of the main components of that junior group guidance curriculum. And it's a great opportunity for your child to kind of get these lessons in a group setting with other juniors, as well as have sort of more of that connection with his counselor as well. So those classes will kick off starting next week once midterms are through. So one of the things that we're first going to touch on in junior group guidance, though, is course selection, because that's sort of the next big thing that's coming up in the year, believe it or not. So the course selection process is really important, especially going into senior year and thinking about your senior year courses are going to look like. So when we think about the senior year course load, it's going to be really important to ensure that your son is challenging himself appropriately for senior year, while also thinking about still the various commitments that he's going to have, particularly in the fall of senior year. The fall of senior year can be very busy. Your son will likely have college apps that are due. If he's applying early to schools, he'll have those applications probably due in November. So that means that his fall will be really busy. A lot of our students have fall sports, co-curriculars, clubs, activities, things that they're doing outside of school. So senior year can get really hectic. So when we're thinking about his schedule, it's going to be really important that we try to make it as balanced as possible, and make sure that he'll have time to do everything that he wants to do, but that he's also still taking a rigorous course load, because colleges will be looking for that. So also for students who are planning to apply early to colleges, those colleges will also see his first quarter grades. So having a good start to senior year is going to be really important. So that's another component of sort of building his course list for senior year. So in order for, go back real quick, Eddie. In order for your son to have the option to take an honors or AP class, they do have to be recommended by their current teacher this year for those higher level honors and AP courses. And so those recommendations will be made available to students when they return from their February break on the 28th. Once those decisions are posted, your son will get sort of his course sheet that will have those recommendations listed at the top. He'll meet with his guidance counselor one-on-one to talk about what courses he'll take next year. And then once we go over that, that course sheet will need to be signed by you as the parent. It'll be important for you to approve of those courses too. And then that course sheet will then be due on March 14th. For those courses to kind of go into the system. So our goal when we're kind of meeting with your son to really talk about that list is, again, like I said, to develop sort of an appropriately balanced and rigorous schedule, and as well as also ensure that all those graduation requirements are met. So we'll be talking all about that course selection process. That's one of our first things for junior guidance. All right. And also throughout junior guidance, we'll be addressing standardized testing as well, everyone's favorite thing. So colleges accept both the SAT and ACT. Those are the two major standardized tests that colleges use to, assess students in the application process. Both tests are universally accepted by pretty much every college. One is not better than the other. I think the most important thing is that your son takes the test that he feels like best fits him, that he likes the best of the two. A lot of times a student does have a preference of maybe which test they prefer. Although actually the majority of students perform pretty comparably on both tests, with a sort of small percentage maybe doing extremely better on one over the other. But most perform pretty average on each test. But let's see. So your son at this point has already taken the practice ACT, took that sophomore year, and this fall he took the practice SAT. So at this point he has also gotten a sense of what each test is like. And he'll continue to talk with his guidance counselor, building that testing plan for the course of junior year. We usually recommend that students in general take 3 tests, 2 of those tests being during junior year. So those 2 tests could be 2 SATs, it could be 2 ACTs, 1 of each. But either way, we usually recommend that before senior year, they have 2 actual test scores under their belt. And then a lot of students will then take 1 more test in the fall of senior year. So most colleges will look at the highest test score, which is known as the super score. So this is sort of done by adding the highest sort of subsections from each of the different test dates that he's done, and sort of creating a super score. So like the best possible score that your son has gotten over the course of his test taking. So that's kind of nice that colleges will take that. There are a few differences between each test, and your son's counselor can also go more in depth into the differences and figuring out which test might be best for your son to take. But in general, the SAT allows a little more time per question. The questions are usually a little lengthier in their wording and require more reasoning skills. Whereas the ACT is a little bit more of a speed test. So you don't have as much time per question. And the ACT also has something called the science section, which the SAT does not have. And it's a section that people, I think, either love or hate. They either do great on it or they don't. So for some people who love that science section on the ACT, that might be a good test for them to take. The other thing I'll mention that's on this slide is that many colleges are now test optional. So this is something that has recently developed over the last couple of years with COVID, is that a lot of schools, because students simply couldn't take tests, a lot of schools waived their test requirement for students. And a lot of schools have now sort of carried out that test optional policy for the next few years or even indefinitely, which is kind of exciting because now students aren't necessarily limited to applying to schools, only to the schools where they, fall in that test score range. It gives them a little more opportunity to apply to schools and not have to worry as much about their testing. And so that's really great that most schools are now test optional. There are still a few here and there that do require them. And when your son gets to his senior year, and we're really looking at his college list, we'll sit down with him and help him figure out whether he should send his scores or not send his scores. And we'll kind of walk him through that process too. But that's basically testing in a nutshell. And we'll also have a lot of prep classes that your son can take. Your son may have already taken one at BC High already, which is great. But there also are a lot of free prep resources that we post about in the Eagle Update as well.
All right, so standardized testing isn't all that fun, but once we get through some of that with our juniors, we start to get into the really exciting stuff with the college search. And at BC High in our guidance department, we feel strongly that there's really no such thing as one perfect school for students. We think that there's actually a lot of schools out there that can be a really good match for your sons. And there's a lot of good reasons and different reasons why certain schools may be a better fit for certain students. But finding that fit does take time and it does take research. So our advice in this process, both for you and for your sons, is to be as open-minded as possible, to research what's out there, those thousands of different schools that we talked about that are across the country and even across the world, and visit as many college campuses as you can. Getting on a college campus is a really awesome way to learn about it, to immerse yourself into the culture and see what it's really like. So with COVID, virtual visits have become a much more common experience for students to partake in relating to the college search. So your sons will have the opportunity to either do virtual or in-person visits. So depending on your schedule, their schedules, they might be able to fit in some virtual visits and also get actually physically onto some college campuses. We recommend to visit at least 5 colleges during junior year, but now that there's these virtual options, it seems like you can even do more than that. So really immersing yourself in the visit process is really helpful. We will also have college fairs here at BC High. Some of you may have participated in those in prior years with other sons. So we will have those here, and we will also have information sessions at BC High where we have colleges come and meet with our students. We'll talk more about that when we get to the senior year curriculum, but we'll really want your sons to be spending time partaking in these opportunities right here at BC High. College websites can be another awesome resource for you and your sons to use to do some of this research. You can find virtually anything about a college on their website, so digging through some of that information can be a helpful way to start this search. And then also taking advantage of SCORE, which is our new college search tool that we will talk about. I'll talk about in just a minute. So those are some of the ways that you can start doing the research to learn about colleges. And as we meet with your sons to help them get this research started, we're going to be asking them to really think about what are the quote unquote must-haves for them in terms of their college experience. There are a lot of different factors out there to consider. So we're going to really push them to think about what are the things that are most important for them when it comes to their college experience. So we might have them think about the size of a campus. Do they want to be in a smaller classroom environment where they can get to know their classmates and professors? Or do they want to be at a bigger school where they're going to have a lot of new people around? Do they want to be close to home, or do they want to go across the country? Does that match what you're hoping for them? So we'll talk about where in the world they might want to be for college. We'll talk about private versus public. We'll talk about different specialty schools, liberal arts schools, specialized business, engineering, technical schools, things like that. We'll really get them thinking about if they have particular interests in an area of academic focus or a particular major that they'd like to pursue, using that as a factor, or even just extracurricular offerings if they're looking to participate in a particular sport or club or activity in college, they can use that as a factor. So we'll have a lot of conversations one-on-one with your sons to really help them figure out what it is with these factors that can help them start to narrow down their college list. So I mentioned SCORE. For those of you that may have older children, you may be familiar with Naviance. SCORE is our version of Naviance. We switched over to it last year. We found that the college search, the kind of multimedia profiles, the overall user experience was stronger than our experience with Naviance. So far we've been really happy with it, as have our students. SCORE from the guidance end is used predominantly to track college applications, send out application materials, and house all of our historical results for BC High students. So we use SCORE to kind of collect all of that data. And we will also use SCORE throughout junior and senior year to build your son's college list. We'll have access to their accounts where we can add schools, make suggestions, and kind of collaborate with you and your sons on this college list. And then from your side and from the student side, SCORE is a really great research tool. So every college has a page in which you can learn anything about their admission statistics, their majors, their different programs, the cost, the student body, all sorts of different information about the school itself. It can be used for, like I said, building that list. So your sons will be able to add to that, as will you. After next week's morning presentation, we will send out a link to all parents with the email that we have on file to register for a SCORE account. So that will then prompt you to have your own account and have access to all this information as well. Students actually in sophomore guidance set up their SCORE accounts. So your sons have already seen this. They may not have looked at it as much since then, but we will start getting them really familiar with it once our classes start again next week. This is a picture of a scattergram that we wanted to show you. This is a feature of SCORE that the students love, and they always will go to this page as one of the first things that they look at when they go to a college profile. So this is a scattergram for Providence College. It's a school that we're showing because we have a lot of data. We have a lot of students that tend to apply here every year. So it gives you a good picture of what a scattergram might show. And this information is only BC High students. So when a student logs into their SCORE account and goes to the PC scattergram, they're seeing here students from the class of 2018 to the class of 2020 that had applied to Providence, and you can see their admission results. So you'll see the green circles are students that were accepted. The blue circles and yellow circles were students that were either waitlisted or deferred. And then the red triangles are students that were not admitted. But what's important to note when you look at these scattergrams is that it's only 2 data points. It's GPA and test scores, and that's it. You don't have any other information about this person that you're looking at. So it's really important that you're aware of that, and we'll make sure that your sons are aware of that as well. Some kids tend to look at this and immediately think, oh, I'll definitely get in, or oh, I have no chance. And there's a lot more to it than that. So we just want to caution against using this as kind of a be all end all for admission decisions. It's also historical data. Unfortunately, colleges tend to get more selective every year. So someone that maybe was admitted a prior year might not have the same chances the following year. We can't be certain, but it's just a good kind of general starting point to see what the academic criteria have been for certain schools. One thing that I think is really interesting about the scattergrams in SCORE versus Naviance is that you can actually change the type of application. You'll see in the right-hand corner here, it says application type. So if your son's thinking of applying early decision to Providence, he could switch the scattergram to only show students that had applied early decision. And that may shift what the scattergram looks like. So you can kind of parse it out that way. SCORE does have a feature that we're looking into potentially using to mark students with special circumstances. So right now you can't tell if a student was an athlete or what major a student applied to, whether or not they had any sort of connection to the school. So it doesn't give you those other special factors that sometimes come into play. So we're looking into seeing if that's something we'll use down the road. But just keep in mind, these are just very general admission statistics that we have from BC High. So over the course of the next couple of months, your sons will be working with their guidance counselors one-on-one to build a preliminary list of colleges to consider applying to come the fall. And we're going to use a lot of those factors that I mentioned earlier to kind of think about what types of schools will be a good fit for your sons. And we'll put into SCORE a bunch of recommendations based on what your sons have shared with us and what we know about them after having known them for a few years. This list will start out big. It might be 25 or 35 schools at the start. We do not want your sons to apply to all of those schools. It's just an opportunity for us to give them a wide range of options. And then what we expect of your sons is for them to take a look at what we've recommended, for them to do some research, and start cutting down the list based on the things they like and don't like, and giving us that feedback as well so that we can continue to make edits as we go. So ultimately, by the time they get to senior year, usually we suggest that students have somewhere between 8 to 12 colleges on their list. That will vary a little bit depending on the individual, but that's generally what we like to see. And really what's important to us is that any school that your son submits an application to should be a school that he could see himself attending. We're going to talk a lot about the importance of having a balanced list, which means having a range of schools that are reaches, targets, and likelies that kind of span across the levels of competition for your son's particular profile. And any school that he applies to, he should be able to say, I'd like to go here, even if it is a school that falls on a more likely category. Shouldn't just put a school on his list just to check that box off the list. It should be a school he generally sees himself interested in. We will talk with your sons about this balance a lot. And we're also going to talk with them about the importance of having a financial safety. It's no secret that college these days is a lot of money. So we will want to make sure that your sons are thinking about having a varied level of affordability in their college list. So some financial safeties might be state schools, applying to a Massachusetts state school, or applying to a school that might be a more likely fit for him, where he has a good chance of getting some good scholarship money on or from. And Jesuit schools even can be great financial safeties for our students. They tend to be very generous with admission and aid and scholarship packages. So we'll make sure we have a lot of those conversations over the course of the coming months.
Thanks, Kyle. And I know Kyle mentioned about SCORE. We will have a SCORE training, and there's a slide towards the end that tells you about that SCORE training, but it's happening on Tuesday, February 8th in the morning. On this slide, you see something that says demonstrated interest. And I would say in the last 25 years, when you think of factors in admission, this is probably the factor that has grown the most, and one which admission counselors tend to be a little bit hesitant to talk about to you as a prospective parent and your son, but they talk a lot about it in the admission offices. So what does demonstrating interest mean? It means that colleges are expecting students, not all colleges, because not all colleges track level of interest, but those that do, and I would say it's the majority of colleges track it in some way, want to see that your son has shown interest in their college. And that interest can be showed in a variety of ways. So you'll see here that we have a number of listing of events that happen at BC High and things which your son can do to demonstrate interest. But we have, as Kyle mentioned, 2 college fairs at BC High, one in the spring, which will be happening on Wednesday, April 27th. We hope that COVID will allow us to have the fair inside. We also have a fall fair that this year we actually did outside, and it was great because it was a perfect day. But that's a wonderful opportunity for your son to meet the admission counselor, who in most cases will read his file. They'll usually ask him to fill out an inquiry card, and that's super important because they'll log that into the system, and that will be a point of demonstrating interest. In addition, many colleges come to visit BC High in the fall of senior year. We usually have over 100 colleges in a non-pandemic year come to visit BC High. And even this year, we had a lot of colleges, probably not quite as 100, but a lot came to meet with your sons. And that's a great way to demonstrate interest. And then a little bit unique to BC High is that we have about 20 colleges that do individual interviews at BC High. Being that we're a Jesuit school, we have that advantage that a vast majority of the Jesuit colleges are open to doing interviews at BC High. So Boston College is a school that many of your sons are interested in, and they only do interviews at 2 schools, BC High and one other. Schools like Holy Cross and Fairfield and Fordham and Loyola, all Jesuit colleges that your sons are interested in, come and do interviews. But we have also non-Jesuit schools. Kyle's, where Kyle used to work, Bentley does interviews, Babson does interviews, Suffolk. So a variety of schools do interviews at BC High. And if your son does have an interview at BC High, that can help his chances of demonstrating interest. Colleges can actually, probably one of the best ways to show interest is to visit the campus. And pre-COVID, of course, that would actually mean going to the college itself. Now they can track if your son does a virtual tour on the website. And if your son goes to the website, how long does he stay on the website? If they send him an email, does he open the email? Does he open an attachment? So it can kind of get crazy how much they can track. I would say that colleges worry if they don't see any evidence that the student has done research on the school. Their fear is that if a student hasn't demonstrated any interest, that student may not have any interest in the college, and the college does not want to waste an acceptance on a student who isn't really interested. When colleges do studies, they find that the kids who visit the campus probably have the best chance of matriculating at that college if accepted. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to demonstrate interest, but it is a very important factor that colleges don't oftentimes talk about. I would say in the spectrum of colleges, there are a few colleges that still do not track demonstrated interest. But I would say the vast majority now track it at some level. And there are some colleges that it's an incredibly important factor. So unfortunately, you don't really know what colleges are which in this process. So I would err on the side that basically all colleges care at least somewhat with demonstrated interest. But this is something, sometimes you say, is there an advantage of my son going to BC High? And I would say that most high school students applying to college have never heard of demonstrated interest and don't understand the importance. But I guarantee your sons going through group guidance will hear about this a lot. And it doesn't mean they always follow through on it, but they should know how important demonstrating interest is. And we do remind your son, so you don't have to be the only person reminding him about this. Visiting colleges, Kyle said, we recommend visiting 5 colleges. I would say now, last year was like many colleges that don't even come to us because of the pandemic. I would say now a lot of colleges are allowing for in-person visits, but it still ranges. There are some schools that still don't want students on campus, or they will have a campus tour where it's only outside. Visiting during February and April vacations are really great times because the colleges are in session, but that your sons have off. What I would say is if you're interested in doing that, please try to sign up and register soon, because many of those schools, because of COVID, may not allow for the huge tours that they usually had in the past and may limit the number of people. But what I'd say is even if you go on your own, you go to the admission office, they'll oftentimes give you a self-guided tour. Just try, if they give you the opportunity to sign in, even if you're doing a self-guided tour, so that they can register that you've been on campus. So hopefully that makes sense about demonstrated interest and its importance. Again, I think it's a factor that has really grown over the years, and a lot of kids don't know about it, but hopefully your sons will be well-versed in demonstrating interest. All right, Eddie, you're up next.
All right. So an important part of the college application process are letters of recommendation. And fortunately for your son, he's going to get an excellent letter of recommendation from his guidance counselor automatically. Our letters of recommendation tend to be a broad overview of their experience at BC High, both inside and outside of the classroom. All that we ask is that your sons fill out a questionnaire. We'll have them start that questionnaire in class, and then they'll probably have to finish it at home. But that questionnaire will give us some more details that we can add to their letters of recommendation. We'll also send out an email to all of you at some point in March, where you guys can offer feedback on your son's experience at BC High. And we find that your answers to those questions are just solid gold for our letters of recommendation. So we appreciate it when you guys fill those out and send those back to us. Your sons will also need to ask a teacher for a letter of recommendation, and we try to encourage them to ask before May 1st, to ask one of their core academic teachers their junior year for a letter of recommendation. Some of the more highly selective colleges in the United States, and BC and Syracuse are in that list as well, will require 2 letters of recommendation. In that In that circumstance, we either encourage them to ask a second junior teacher or to wait until senior year to ask another teacher to write a letter of recommendation. Oftentimes our students will have a teacher senior year that they've had previously, and those can be great teachers to ask for letters of recommendation. And then finally, we ask all of your sons to write a thank you card to those faculty that write them letters of recommendation. Teachers don't get paid extra to write those letters. Oftentimes they have to take time out of their busy lives and their personal lives to write those letters. So writing a thank you letter is really important to those teachers. All right, let's move on to senior year. Preview of senior year. Now, one of the first things that we're going to do when we start meeting with your son senior year is talking to them about a plan of action for applying to college. Nowadays, colleges have so many different application plans and deadlines. We're going to go over a few of the ones that are the most common that you'll probably run into next year when you're going through this process. The first is regular decision. Back when I was applying to college, regular decision was really the only application plan out there. Typically, regular decision applications are due right around January or early February. And then your sons can expect to get a decision back in March or early April. There are also some colleges out there that have what's called rolling admission. Rolling admission means that they don't have a specific application deadline, but colleges will review applications as they come in and oftentimes get back to students pretty quickly. Xavier in Ohio and Loyola in Chicago are two popular schools that our students apply to that both have rolling admission. And both of those schools got back to our students within a few days, actually, this year with an admissions decisions, which is pretty neat. But one thing to note about schools that have rolling admission is that eventually their freshman classes fill up. So you don't want to wait too long to apply to schools. Waiting until the spring might be a bad decision. So we often encourage students to apply rolling admission either in the fall or the winter of their senior year. All right, so in the last few years, colleges have really been making a big push to try to get students to apply early to schools. And there are two major application plans for early applications. The first is early action, and then there's early decision, and they're similar in a lot of ways. Both have application deadlines right around the beginning of November. In both cases, you can expect to get a decision back from those schools around the holidays. But the big difference is that early decision is binding, meaning that if your son gets accepted early decision, he's expected to matriculate there the following year. So in that case, you can only apply to one school early decision for obvious reasons. You can't commit to two schools at the same time. And there's an agreement that you have to sign, that you sign as the parent, your son will sign, and that your son's guidance counselor will sign, saying that they're only applying to one school ED. And if they get accepted early decision, they're going to attend that school. Early action, on the other hand, is not binding. So your son is allowed to apply to as many schools as he wants. Early action, you can hear back from the schools, see which ones he gets accepted to, see what kind of financial aid packages you get from those different colleges, then see what schools he gets into regular decision, and then make a decision about where he wants to attend the following year. As you can see up here, one of the newer things that we have in college now is ED1 and ED2. So ED1 is applying early in November. ED2 happens right around January 1st. Colleges will say that ED2 is there for students who aren't sure around November 1st if they want to apply to a school early decision. So it gives them a little more time to think about applying early decision to a school. Students can use ED2 to apply to a school in case they get denied from the first school that they applied to ED1. So it can work out that way. Now, why would a student choose to apply to a school early decision when it's binding? The big reason that students apply to schools early decision is because the acceptance rate in early decision tends to be quite a bit higher than it is for all the other different application plans. Now, for early action, sometimes there might be a little bit of an advantage, but sometimes that advantage can be pretty marginal. But for early decision, there's a decidedly bigger difference. There's a higher acceptance rate for early decision than there is for all those other plans. But again, it is a binding agreement, so it's not something that you want to enter into lightly. It should come after doing lots of research on that school. It should come after researching the cost of that school and trying to decide if that's a school that your family can afford. And if it turns out that there is one school that your son really loves, and that's a school that he has a reasonable chance of getting into, and you're okay paying for the school and everything, then early decision could be a great option for your son.
And there's another type of application plan. And again, as it says at the top of the thing, just to make things a little bit more confusing, there is some application plan that they can be called single choice early action or restrictive early action. A lot of the more highly competitive schools might have this, as we noted on the slide, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Georgetown. They're non-binding programs, so they're still early action. A student isn't required to go there if admitted, but they have little nuances like maybe they say you can't apply to any other schools, any early decision schools, or you can apply to early action schools, but only if it's a public school. So I know Harvard used to say, I think they've stopped this, would say, you can't apply to any other college, any other private school early action, but you could apply to say UMass because they're public. So, or maybe to a college outside the US. So they have nuances. I think my biggest suggestion with this or piece of advice would be, if you see this or your son sees it, and we'll talk with them about this as well. If you see some of this, read on the college's website, what do they mean by that? So that you're making sure you follow it in the right way. That's really, I think, the big thing. They're few and far between, but if you see something like that, if you're confused about where your son is, please have them speak with us.
So should my son apply early? We talked a little bit about this just a second ago. As your son starts to engage with colleges, one of the questions that you're going to want to ask these colleges is, what % of all applicants are admitted early? And what % of early applicants are admitted versus those in the regular decision pool? It's a great question to ask because the advantages of applying early vary widely from college to college. Like I mentioned earlier, applying early decision can have a big advantage. Early action, on the other hand, it changes from school to school. So that's something that you're going to want to talk to admissions counselors about when you're at the college fair, when you do a college visit, when you do an info session. Those are great questions to ask. Really, the goal, though, is to send the best application possible to the college. For some seniors, they finish their applications early, their grade point average and their test scores are kind of where they want to be and are competitive with the schools they're applying to. And so for them, it makes sense to try to apply early to some schools. But other students, either because they're really busy in the fall or they just haven't gotten their act together, may not have their applications ready, or they might want to have a quarter or two under their belt senior year to raise up their grade point average and maybe take another test or two to try to get a better score on those tests. So then in that case, it might make more sense for them to wait and apply regular decision. But that's stuff that we're going to be working on with your students pretty closely in the fall.
There we go. All right. So the vast majority of the schools that our students apply to use an application called the Common Application. So the nice thing with Common App is that students only have to fill in all of their information one time. And then once that's completed, they can then send it to all of their schools that they're applying to, at least the ones that use the Common App. So it means they're not having to fill out, if they're applying to 12 schools, they don't have to fill in the same stuff 12 times, which is pretty great. So we strongly encourage that students use Common App for all the schools that accept Common App. It's just the easiest way to apply. And the Common App is just it's pretty straightforward. It's not a difficult thing to complete. The only thing is it can be a little time consuming, just filling out all the different sections. So the Common App includes biographical information, the students' list of activities, co-curriculars, volunteering, jobs, everything that they've done throughout high school. It includes the college essay, or where your student will upload his college essay. And it also includes other information about his just family background, info about his high school he attends, and his courses that he's taking a senior year. So once he fills all of that out, he can then send all of that information through Common App to all of the schools on his list. And we'll actually be starting the Common App in-group guidance class will help your son create an account with Common App, and introduce him to the different sections and kind of what that Common App entails. And we'll continue that work through, and all throughout senior guidance, and making sure they complete it on time. And in addition, so as I mentioned before, the college essay is also a component of Common App. And so every student in their senior English class, regardless of the level of the English class, they'll be actually working on that college essay in English class and getting feedback and comments from their teacher. They're also welcome to bring their essay to us, to their counselor, and have us look over it. It's always good to have another set of eyes reading over those college essays. So that's the Common App. And again, we'll be helping your son kind of go through that whole process and filling out those applications.
I think I get all the slides about little weird things that happen in the college process. Single choice early action, now the coalition application. So the coalition application is, it's another application, another type of application that is used actually by a really small number of schools exclusively. I think we found only the University of Washington uses it exclusively. But some schools use both the coalition application and their own application. I think Rutgers is one of those schools. It used to be a standalone application like the Common Application. It is now actually, we just found out today, so this is hot news, everybody. It is now going to be integrated into SCORE, so that students will actually fill it out through SCORE. Again, as Maddie said, we encourage students to use the Common App whenever possible. And the number of schools that use the Coalition App exclusively, again, one that we know of. Many will use both the Coalition and the Common App, but so it's just another application we want you to be aware of. Again, I think maybe the coalition application might be about 8 years old, maybe or so, Sean. I think maybe 5, 8. I've had one student in the last since it came about who had to use it. So just, it's not used that often, but we want you to know about it. And again, we encourage students to use the Common App when possible. So I want to talk a little bit about the transcript. Transcript obviously is an important part of your son's college application. We will send those to colleges. So just to give you a little bit kind of thoughts on that. So the senior year transcript for your son will include the following. It'll be his final grades from freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So it will not include quarter grades from the first 3 years. It won't include midterm grades from the first years. It won't include teacher names or his effort and conduct, just the final grades. And we'll also have a list of his current courses in progress of senior year. And for students who are applying early action or early decision, it will include his first quarter grades. So that will be sent to colleges. Colleges, that is all they will see if your son's applying early action or early decision to make their decision. So those final first 3 years in that first quarter of senior year. So for students who are applying regular decision, so those January 1st kind of deadlines, or maybe, January 15th, or also if a student maybe got deferred in early, in the early round, the colleges will see the same transcript again, final freshman, sophomore, junior grades, but then they will also they'll see those quarter one grades. And when we get the semester one grades, we'll send an updated transcript in early February. So just so that, you have an idea of sort of what college we'll be seeing. The final senior grades will not be seen until obviously June, when your son tells us what school they're attending. So we're not going to send his final transcript to all the schools he applied to, just to where he's going to be attending. And so students also, we have them make sure that they let us know about a month before their deadlines that they need the transcript to be sent. So again, we'll work all that stuff with them in senior guidance to make sure that they don't miss any deadlines for that kind of stuff. So a little bit about kind of whose responsibility is what. Again, this goes into next year, and we'll go over this with your sons, and we'll also remind them over and over and over again in their senior year. But so their responsibility is to request the transcript from us and the recommendations from their teachers. It's their responsibility to submit their application on time. If they're going to send SAT or ACT scores, it's your son's responsibility to send those to the colleges. And again, once a student has applied to a school, the new thing is, I think, I'm still not used to this all the time. But they will get an email back from the college of telling them to set up a portal on the college's website so they can check any information. That's mostly how the college will communicate with your son. No longer do they get something in the mail, really. Even a lot of decisions don't even come in the mail until after they've already read it online. So, if something's missing from your son's file, they will be contacted. They might get an email saying, check your portals, we have information for you. And it could say, hey, we're missing your teacher recommendation or something like that. So the portal is an important thing for your son to set up, after he's applied to a college. But those are all his responsibilities. And again, we'll remind him of all these responsibilities. Our responsibility in the guidance office is to make sure we get his transcripts out, to send our recommendation, the teacher recommendation, and the BC High profile. And we send all those things through SCORE. So all that gets done through us. And, if there's questions, your son obviously know to come and ask us about those things.
Okay, so if you think your son might be interested in playing a sport in college, there are 3 things that they really need to do junior year. The first is to set up an eligibility account with the NCAA at the Eligibility Center, www.eligibilitycenter.org. That's the first place that they need to go to. There's a $90 fee associated with setting up an eligibility account, although there are fee waivers for families that qualify. Next is that they should start talking to their coaches about what level they think would be a good fit for them. And then finally, they should notify their guidance counselor if they are interested in playing a sport. One thing back at the Eligibility Center I should mention is that once they create that account with the Eligibility Center, we will send the transcript to the NCAA through the Eligibility Center, and then we'll do that again their senior year once they've completed all their coursework at BC High so that they can be eligible to play college sports.
Judy, you're muted.
I almost turned on when Eddie was talking and I didn't, sorry. One of the things we will talk about with your sons a lot in senior group guidance as well is financial aid and sort of how that process works. And really the basics of it we'll go over with them, but just to remind you, there are 2 main types of financial aid. There's need-based aid, and that's based solely on a family's financial situation, and then there's merit-based aid. So for need-based aid, the important things to think about is filling out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which all colleges are going to require if a family wants to apply for need-based aid. Many colleges will also require a form called the CSS profile, which colleges will use that to determine their own funds, need-based funds that they have. So the FAFSA is federal and state money. The CSS profile is a college's own funds. Many private colleges will require that to be filled out. And again, it's important to check financial aid deadlines. Some schools want you to fill out those forms as your son is applying. Some will have deadlines, January 1st or whatever it might be. So it's important to pay attention to that. Also required now by the federal government, every college website has to have something on it, what they call the net price calculator. So you could Google Boston College net price calculator and it will bring you up to the BC financial aid page. And there will be a calculator obviously on there that it'll ask you some questions, some financial questions, and it will pop up that a student who looks like this should get this kind of aid. This is a potential package. There's a disclaimer on every single one I've seen saying, this doesn't mean this is what you'll get, but it gives you an idea of sort of what your son could be looking at as far as aid goes. Some only do need-based aid. Some will include merit aid because they might ask more questions about maybe some academics or things like that. So that's an important thing. I think, Kyle mentioned earlier, it's no secret that the costs of college is expensive. So I think looking at those net price calculators, and asking questions about those is really important, I think, to get a better picture of, of sort of that whole, the list that your son's going to come up with too. Merit-based aid, again, some colleges will award merit-based when a student gets accepted. They might get a dean scholarship for $20,000 a year. Other schools might have separate applications. So again, those are important questions to ask when you're doing those visits. And then, there are a lot of highly selective schools that don't offer merit aid at all, like a Harvard, for example. But a lot of those schools will meet that full financial need as determined by the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So again, kind of paying attention to those things. I think early in the process is really important. I didn't say this being my former life was as a financial aid officer. So I spent a lot of time across the desk from families who didn't have these conversations until May of senior year. And they were much more difficult then to have with a family than they are to have in the spring of junior year or even early senior year to have an idea of what this really could look like for a family. So I urge you to pay close attention to that and to ask a lot of questions of financial aid officers at the colleges that your son is in.
So I'll say it again, college is pretty expensive these days, but fortunately there's lots of scholarship money out there to kind of help offset the bill a little bit. One of the places that we recommend students go is this website called goingmerry.com. Goingmerry.com is kind of like the Common App for college scholarships. So in Going Merry, you'll set up an account, you'll put in lots of information about yourself, and then Going Merry will match you with scholarships they think could be a good fit for you. And then Going Merry goes kind of one step further and will pre-populate all of your information into different scholarship application forms, which is great. So we really try to encourage students to set up a Going Merry account in their senior year. Also in the guidance department, every day we get emails about different scholarship opportunities. And actually right now is kind of when the scholarship season starts to heat up. And so we put some of the bigger ones in a Google Doc that we have posted in the Eagle Update every week. I mean, you could probably go in the Eagle Update now and look and see what scholarships were out there for seniors, but we'll do the same thing next year for your sons. And then there are some really specific scholarships, like today we got one for the town of Norwood, I think, and I sent an email out to all the seniors who live in Norwood saying, here's a way to register for, or here's a way to apply for this scholarship that's just available for students in your town. And speaking of your specific town, your town's high school can be a great resource for finding more college scholarships. Usually towns, the guidance department in those towns will have a listing of scholarships that are available just for people that come from your town. And it doesn't matter that you go to BC High, you're still eligible for a lot of those scholarships. So we encourage students to try to check their local high schools. And then finally, when your son does figure out what colleges he's going to apply to, start looking at those financial aid websites like Judy just mentioned, and look to see what merit scholarships they have available. Like Judy said, some of those merit scholarships will be available when they apply. Just for applying, they'll be eligible for those things. But other times there are special application forms that they have to fill out. And you'll only know that by going to the college's specific financial aid website.
Excellent. So some important events and dates to maybe put on your calendar for the rest of junior year. We got some fun stuff coming up in the spring. So first things first, you heard Kyle Swords talk a little bit about SCORE. So if you want to know more about SCORE, how to use it as a parent, we'll actually be having a SCORE parent training that'll be virtual. We'll actually have a representative from SCORE joining us to kind of show you all how to use that application. And so that SCORE parent training will be on Tuesday, February 8th, starting at 8 a.m. If you cannot make it, we will be recording it. And so you just have to, you can shoot me an email and ask for the recording if you missed that training. Also coming up, we have a college admissions panel where we'll actually have admissions representatives from a variety of different schools coming to talk with you and our students about sort of the admissions process at their specific colleges. So that will be happening Wednesday, April 6th at 7:30. And so we'll see if that'll happen in person or virtually, depending on COVID this spring. But so that'll provide a lot of really helpful information and insight into that admissions process. And then, as we mentioned before, April 27th is our spring college fair. That will hopefully happen in McNeese Gymnasium. Maybe we'll try to do it outside like we did in the fall. We'll see. But that'll be April 27th. And we'll actually be talking with your sons in group guidance class about preparing for that college fair. You know, what are some good questions to ask the admissions reps that you speak with, and all of that good stuff. And last but not least, April 3rd, there also is a NACAC Spring Virtual College Fair. So a lot of organizations that, you know, used to have a lot of college fairs offered in the spring for juniors to attend. COVID has disrupted some of those, but thankfully there is still this virtual one going on in the spring as well.
And then in senior year, we will also have events. As we mentioned, we had a beautiful fall fair. It was like the best day possible in September. So I'm hoping we can have that again, so we can have it outside. Even without COVID, it was probably nicer to have their fair outside. And that happens right during the school day. So students they can go right from BC High usually at the last period they go, and we usually have somewhere around 100 and 150 colleges represented from all different parts of the world attending that college fair. If you forget everything that we talked about, and then over the spring and summer, other questions come up, we will have the senior parent question and answer night, usually in late September, where you can ask any questions about any part of this process that could be helpful. We partner up with MEFA, which is the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, to run our financial aid night, which usually happens in early October. MEFA is an outstanding organization. They basically exist to help families understand the financial aid process. And very few states have an organization like MEFA. So if you have complicated financial aid questions, MEFA is a great organization to get in touch with, and they are free. And then we'll have in April another night once your son gets a financial aid package, just to be able to understand that financial aid package, because sometimes it's a little confusing, the packages, and we try to help you understand what the colleges are really offering. Then, both in junior and senior year, we highly, highly recommend that you read the Eagle Update. As I said earlier, and we've said, your sons are going to be getting this information in group guidance class. But if your son is like any typical teenager, they generally don't always share with you everything that goes on in their school day at home at night. So they may know something, but you're like, I don't know about this college fair. When's it taking place, or whatever it might be. The Eagle Update is such a great place for you to look every Thursday. You may have noticed that the guidance section is usually the largest section. Heidi Hayes in our office does such a great job writing it every week. So please look at the Eagle Update for information starting now, but definitely going through senior year. And then all the information about college visits and interviews are always in the Eagle Update. And then we also put it in SCORE. Just to kind of date there, May 1st, that's the universal candidate reply date. Most colleges, if a student applies regular decision, will let students know somewhere between late February and April 1st. And then between April 1st and May 1st, students have to make a decision. So they need to deposit to some college to secure a spot by May 1st. So next slide, I think we've done what we set out to do, which is at 7:46. So it's perfect because we now have a few opportunities to answer some questions. I love this slide because Eddie chooses, go back to that one. Eddie chooses to remind you how I looked 17 or 18 years ago. So I'm sure you all think, boy, Sean, you've aged a lot, but that's the way I looked. But a couple things in the Eagle Update, we did put not only the copy of the PowerPoint slides, but we put a couple of other things. So I just wanted to point them out. We put the topics that we cover in junior group guidance. So again, if you're wondering what is your son learning this cycle in group guidance, you can see that in that handout. We also put a list of where famous people went to college. And I really put a variety of people from the entertainment world, athletic world, politics, et cetera. And there's so many people who went to a variety of colleges who become famous and successful in their field. So I think the idea behind that is you do not only have to go to a very high-powered school to become famous or president of the United States. You probably know that Joe Biden went to the University of Delaware. So a lot of different things, places where people can go and still become very successful. We also list the 27 Jesuit colleges and universities in the country. One of the reasons we mention that, and it's been talked about tonight, is that the Jesuit colleges are incredibly generous in terms of accepting our students. So they accept our students at a much higher rate. So if your son has a twin sister who goes to Notre Dame or a twin brother who goes to Xaverian, both great schools, but he's going to get accepted to the Jesuit colleges at a much higher rate. And then, as Eddie mentioned, I think maybe Judy as well, the Jesuit colleges tend to be incredibly generous. So they're more generous with our students. So the financial aid packages and scholarships tend to be quite good. So if you are kind of like a middle income family and maybe your son is, a good student, but not an amazing student, he may find that he gets really good packages with Jesuit schools. So every year, about a third of our student body, a little under, ends up at a Jesuit college or university, and in part because they offer such great financial aid and scholarships for our students. The good news too is, and I've visited all 27 Jesuit colleges, they're all great. They're really wonderful places, and most of our kids, when they go, feel very at home and end up liking them. There's also a list in the handouts of the testing dates, the ACT and SAT dates, and then a list of the expectations that we have for juniors for the college process. And that's something we'll go over with your sons in group guidance class. All right, so now we'll just open it up. I know we tried our best during the presentation to answer as many of the questions that you had. I know there was one parent who asked a question which I wasn't quite sure exactly what you were asking. So I don't know if you could ask that again, but otherwise, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them now.
Sean, I wanted to add one more thing while people are thinking of questions to ask. That just to remind parents that we will have a Canvas page for the junior guidance curriculum. So you will, as parents, you'll have access to that. And every week, what we do in class, every cycle, I should say, is we have a whole several pages on it, and you'll have access to that. So you'll be able to see what we're doing, and be able to click on any links we talk about with your sons in class. So and also the junior senior guidance curriculum book, the handbook is there to download with a ton of information on it. So just wanted to remind you of that.
And Judy, I'm glad you brought that up, because those of you who have Heidi, or sons have Heidi Hayes and Mike Gardner, they're the two people in our office who put that book together, and it's phenomenal. It's just amazing how well done it is. And I think very few kids in high school would have such a great book. I don't think our students maybe understand how lucky they are, but if you are a parent, especially if you're a parent who had another child go through the process at another high school, I think you'll be amazed by that Canvas book and all the great information there. I see that one parent said, is it true that colleges can see what other colleges you are applying to? Not really. I don't know if Judy, that's what you were going to answer, but really there's no way that colleges could know that. Occasionally there are colleges that may ask in a supplement where else you're applying, but it's pretty rare that a college would ask that. So luckily the answer is no to that.
John,
So-
I think the question that you had, you weren't sure about what they were asking. I think what they're asking is there a correlation between the level of competition of a school and how much they care about demonstrated interest? Meaning, if a school is very selective, does that mean they care less about demonstrated interest or not? So I think that's.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the answer to this, and of course, any of my colleagues can chime in, it depends. There are schools that philosophically, like a Harvard philosophically would say, we don't so much care about demonstrated interest. I think the idea behind that is a school like Harvard wants to get low-income kids whose parents have not gone to college. And how would a student like that know about demonstrated interest? And they might feel that that only advantages wealthier kids who have access to good college counseling. But there are a lot of other colleges where the deans of admissions want to keep their jobs, and knowing that they can technologically track level of interest can really help them craft their class better. So I think that, again, most colleges, I think, are doing it to some degree, but that there are some, and I don't know if it really makes a difference in terms of the selectivity. I think there are some non-selective schools that don't track it that much either, but I would say in general, most schools are tracking it. I know one of the other trends, I'm glad, Kyle, that you brought that up, because one of the other things that we mentioned as right before we got on the webinar here is that one of the other factors that has become incredibly significant in the admission process, in addition to demonstrated interest in the last 15 or 20 years is what major a student says they're intending to put or intending to major in at a college. So I know when I worked in admissions 20 plus years ago, it really wasn't a big deal. I think the understanding was that most 18-year-olds didn't really know what they wanted to study, and that was okay. In fact, I think there was a welcoming idea that when you go to college, you explore and figure out what it is that you want to study. Unfortunately, in my view, more and more colleges are putting quite a bit of emphasis on the major that a student says he or she is wanting to apply to. So it tends to be that certain majors at certain schools are much more competitive. So you probably all could guess, but majors like engineering, the sciences, in particular, students who say pre-med, business, nursing, physical therapy. Those are some of the majors that at a lot of schools are much harder to get into. And the hard part is, how does your son know that? But I would say as a male, many of our male students think of business, and they should just be aware of the fact that it's potentially going to be harder for them. And I know at some schools, they would expect that a student who's putting down business has achieved a certain level of math, maybe calculus or AP calculus, and gotten a certain grade in that calculus or math class. So it does depend widely, but I would say we have found that that is one of the biggest changes in the last few years. And if you look at the the score scattergrams now, you'll see a student who seems like they should have gotten in who might not have, and many times it could be because of major. And then there are certain schools like UMass Amherst, we found out that couple of years ago, computer science is one of their most selective majors. So we had a student with great grades, great test scores, who was waitlisted at UMass Amherst, even though we would have expected him to get accepted just because he was applying to that major. I would say if you put undecided as a major, it's neutral. It's not going to help you or probably hurt you at most schools. And then I would say if your son has a real interest in a little bit of an unusual major that may not be something that a lot of kids apply to, that may be a help. So it depends on the interest that your son has. What I find ironic or funny is that many times when a student gets to a college, they can pretty much change their major pretty easily. Of course, there are exceptions. There's 3,000 plus schools in the country. They always do things a little bit differently. But in general, most schools allow students to change their majors. Probably one of the schools that does not, that a lot of our students apply to, is BC for the business school. But just for instance, at Boston College, they have their Carroll School of Management. If a student wanted to go into business at BC, they could major in economics, which is in the Arts and Science College, and minor in something in the business school, and that's allowed. And as you know, to go into the business world, you don't even have to have a specific business degree except for accounting. So it's one of those things we try to explain that to the boys, but it can be a little bit confusing for them and confusing for you. So please feel free to ask us if we have a sense of how competitive a certain major is at a particular college. So hopefully that was helpful and not too confusing. Kyle, any other questions that are coming up?
One thing I would add, Sean, is that when you're going to college fairs and info sessions, it's always good to ask questions like, is one major more competitive than another? Some colleges will say, when you apply to our college, you're just applying to the college in general, and then you can select what you want to major in. Other colleges will say, like Sean said, that some majors are way more competitive than other majors. And then you can also ask them, are you allowed to change majors once you get to school? Some schools make it very easy to change. Other schools make it more difficult. And like Sean said, there are some majors that are just harder to switch into, like nursing. There's a lot of prerequisite courses that you have to take in the nursing school. So switching into nursing is going to be tough. Same with engineering. There's going to be lots of calculus and physics classes you're going to need to take. And same with business often too. At UMass Amherst, you used to be able to switch into the School of Business. And now they're telling our students that starting next year, they won't be allowed to transfer into the School of Business once they're at UMass Amherst. So if they want to get into Eisenberg School there at UMass, they need to apply into the Eisenberg as seniors in high school.
Great.
John, we've got a question here about Boston College specifically and the number of students that are accepted from BC High. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and the early decision piece with them as well.
Yeah, and we have a great relationship with Boston College Admission Office. Some of you may know Grant Gosselin. He is the Dean of Admission, and he's a wonderful person. I've known him for about 20 years. And Grant is the only person who reads files for BC High, so he knows our school incredibly well. He knows all of our course offerings. He knows about our extracurricular activities. And he's very, very dedicated and thorough in his reading of our application. So that's great news that our students get read so well by Grant. We usually have around 100 or so of our seniors applying. About 50 or so get accepted, and about 25 or between 15 and 25 go. That does vary a little bit year to year, but in general, that's kind of how it's worked out most years. The big difference in the last 2 years is that Boston College used to have an early action program. And as we mentioned before, early action means you apply early, you find out early, but there's no expectation that you have to attend. So what they found out, because more or less the Board of Trustees at Boston College was very concerned about the yield rate. So the percentage of kids who got accepted who chose BC over other schools, they did switch 2 years ago to early decision. They have an early decision round 1, which is November 1st, and an early decision round 2, which is January 1st. And what we found is that our students, as kind of expected, get a much better chance of getting accepted if they apply early decision round 1 or round 2. And unfortunately, like a lot of other selective schools, BC continues to get more selective. I think all of us were hoping perhaps that during the pandemic, that actually these very selective schools might become a little easier. But unfortunately, the opposite happened. Many of the most selective colleges in the country became even more selective and getting record numbers of applications. I just read that, what was it, Colgate, I think they increased their applications the last 2 years, 141%, which you're like, how is that possible? So unfortunately, a lot of schools just became much more competitive, and to be able to stand out, early decision really helps a student stand out if that's the right fit for that student and that family. So I would say at BC, we did have a lot of students apply early decision this year. And I think the ones who we were hoping to get accepted, for the most part, did get accepted. But I think that is really something that helped them a lot by applying early decision. As I mentioned, BC does conduct interviews at BC High, so there's a little bit of an advantage our students have. If they've got a good personality, they are able to meet one of the admission counselors, and the admission counselors do a write-up on the student, and they put that in a file and they pass it on to Grant to just give them a little bit of a sense of their personalities. Grant definitely reads their essays, definitely reads our letters of recommendations. So in that sense, our students definitely get accepted at a higher rate than other places, but unfortunately, it's such a popular school with our students that some kids who really want to go there are not accepted. But many of our students who do apply and want to go apply early decision and do get accepted. So hopefully that answered that question. Kyle,
Sean, there's one here that has been answered, but I think it could benefit for everyone. Asking about if you apply early decision but are denied, can you apply then again regular decision?
No, so great question. So if you
yeah.
apply early decision to a college and are unfortunately denied, or your application is denied, that's the end of the road for you, at least at that point. Perhaps you can go to another college and transfer in. And in fact, in many cases, transferring in, especially to a larger school like a Northeastern or Boston University, Boston College, might actually be easier. But unfortunately, that's the end of the road at that point. You could, just to give you a sense, apply early decision to BC round 1 and get your application denied, and then apply to a school like Providence that has an early decision round 2 in January 1st, that would be allowed. So if you've been denied at one early decision round 1, you are allowed to do an early decision round 2 somewhere else. So that's possible. You can't, as I think was mentioned before, apply to more than one early decision at the same time. So you can't apply to more than one early decision school for November. Again, it is a little confusing, and we will help your sons navigate that process and kind of figure out the best strategy for him in that applying. Kyler, any other questions you think need to be kind of expanded on?
I think we've covered most everything. Those kind of one-offs we were able to answer in
Great.
the chat or in the Q&A feature.
Well, I just want to thank everyone. I'm amazed that 100 and plus of you stayed on till the very end and really appreciate it. I really miss not seeing you guys in person, but I'm glad this technology allows us to hopefully get for you to still get this, I think, very valuable information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. I just want to end kind of with what I started with, try to make this process fun and exciting. I know it's a lot of money and there's a lot of colleges out there, so it can feel daunting. But if you're feeling that where your son is, please direct him or reach out to us so we can help you through this process. And at this point, you may feel a little lost, but I guarantee in a couple of weeks, months, it will be a little bit easier for you. Get out to some colleges. Most colleges have an information session and a tour. Try to do some of those to get a better sense if your son wants a big school, small school, far away, close to home, specialized. And remember, there are close to 50 colleges in the Boston area to visit. So great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Good luck with the storm on Saturday night, and have a good evening. Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
so much, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.